In this video, I'm going to show you how to make an incubator for reptile eggs using a cooler and plastic egg crate. It's not expensive to build, and there is room inside the cooler to hold 6 boxes of eggs. Let's get started. Over the years, I've tried a couple of different solutions for incubating reptile eggs, but I wasn't completely satisfied until I came across this design by Garrett Hartle of Reach Out Reptiles. I bought my parts for this for about $100, and I've built 2 of them so far and have successfully hatched python eggs and gecko eggs from them. I've used coolers before, but I could never get the internal conditions right for python eggs. I live in the Rocky Mountain part of the United States where it is very dry and we have very low relative humidity. For instance, it's pretty common for my snake room humidity to be at about 30%. So when I've incubated eggs in the past, I've always had a struggle getting the humidity just right inside of the egg box. I started with the 120 quart igloo cooler that Garrett recommended. Then I drilled ventilation holes with a 1/4-inch drill bit. This setup is interesting because not only can I get a consistent, durable temperature that I need for the eggs, but inside of the egg box, there is very high humidity without any moisture buildup on the eggs, or even in the substrate in the box. There are 9 holes in the front and back, 4 holes in each end, and 6 holes on top for a total of 32 holes. I mentioned that the temperature is durable because, as Garrett points out in his video, the heat is in the water at the bottom of the incubator, and that heat does not simply disappear when you open the lid. The water retains the heat, so you can open the lid and check on the eggs periodically, and when you close the lid, the temperature has stayed close to the target temperature. This incubator retains most of the water that is put inside, but about every 2 weeks I have to add some more warm water to bring the level back up. I can tell when this is needed because as the water level slowly drops, part of the circulation pump becomes exposed to the air, and the pump makes a loud gurgling sound. In the bottom, I built a platform using a 2-foot by 4-foot sheet of plastic egg crate that I bought at Home Depot. Once when I bought this stuff, I found it in their lighting section. But the next time I went to buy some, it wasn't in lighting, and none of the employees were able to help me find it. Turns out they had it all the way in the back corner of their massive store. So get on their website and look up the location of it in your store, or else you may never find it. The first time I made this incubator, I cut the egg crate using diagonal cutters. But for this one, I'm using an angle grinder. The only real challenge with using an angle grinder is that the spinning blade gets hot, and if you leave it running against any part of the plastic, it will melt the plastic and turn it black. You can see that I had a few melted spots in my finished work. Of course, the other real challenge with using this tool is that it's impossible for me to say the words angle grinder very quickly without sounding like an idiot. I cut a big piece of the egg crate to be the shelf that fits the inside of the container, and then I cut 5 narrower strips that I used underneath to raise the big piece off the bottom. Once I got the big piece to fit, I took some final measurements. I cut 2 of the bottom pieces the same length as the shelf and 5 squares high. Then I cut 3 more pieces to fit in between the long ones. All of these pieces are 5 squares high. The angle grinder really earned its place when it came to trimming all of the jagged ends from the egg crate. It isn't completely necessary to do this, but I didn't want to get scratched up by these pieces. Once I had the two long pieces cut out for the bottom supports, I used cable ties to connect them to the main shelf close to the sides of the shelf. I used 3 cable ties to attach each long piece to the shelf. To lay out the rest of the bottom pieces, I put the long piece about where I wanted it to go and then counted out how many squares the shorter cross pieces needed to be in length. Here you can see me showing off my advanced counting skills. Once I had the rest of the bottom pieces cut out, I first attached the cross pieces to the remaining long piece using 2 cable ties for each connection. Then I put the rest of the bottom assembly in place and attached it to the shelf and the other long piece using more cable ties. Now it's time to add an aquarium heater and a circulation pump. I don't have any particular specs for the heater, but I bought one that is 100 watts off of Amazon, and it is plenty powerful. I haven't had any problems with it, but it has only been running for a couple of months so far. The circulation pump is necessary because it will keep the water in the incubator moving around so that the water heated by the heater is evenly distributed. I definitely wanted the heater to have a big dial on it to adjust the temperature with. I don't know how accurate these things are, but as I'll show you later, there's a way to do this to make the temperature control very precise. So here I'm placing the heater against one of the walls under the shelf, and I'm making sure to leave myself room to access the control dial on the heater. Once it's in place, I'll attach it using a couple of cable ties. At this point I had to stop production when I became aware that a small, furry, woodland creature had come and moved into the empty box that the cooler was shipped in. After assessing the threat from the creature, I went back to work. Be very careful when you tighten the cable ties around the heater. You don't want to squeeze it so tight that the glass breaks. I cut a piece of the egg crate away so that I could run a wire under it for the heater. You'll notice that I'm going to run the wires for the heater and the circulation pump to the same long edge of the shelf. This will be more clear later on why I'm doing that. And like everything else, I attach the wires to the egg crate using cable ties. With the heater in place, it's time to move on to the circulation pump. This is done the same way as everything else. Just find a way to attach it to the egg crate with the cable ties so that it isn't moving around in the bottom of the incubator. It's a little tricky, but I managed to work a cable tie through the grill on the front of the pump. If you do this, make sure the cable tie won't come in contact with the propeller. By this point, the furry woodland creature had left its box and was starting to familiarize itself with my shop. I've decided to name it Creature, and I hope I can find productive things for it to do while it's with me. It's time to put the shelf and electronics into the incubator. Notice that the 2 wires are both connected to the back of the shelf and will go in the back corners of the incubator. This keeps them out of the way when you open and close the container. Also, there's one last step before putting this to use. In order to have the lid of the cooler closed tightly, I cut out a groove to run the wires for the heater and the circulation pump out of the incubator. To make the groove, I pulled out my fancy groove making tool and went to work. Once the wires are in the grooves, I filled in the gaps with hot glue. That's it. Time to clean it out with the shop vac and then bring it inside. I noticed that Creature had returned to his house box where he was settling in for the night. If you're wondering why I have 2 incubators now, it's because reptile eggs incubate at different temperatures. For instance, I incubate ball python eggs at 89 degrees Fahrenheit. But for leopard gecko and turtle eggs, I want a slightly cooler temperature. The egg boxes that I'm using are these 6-quart storage boxes that only cost about $1 each. Inside of each egg box, I am putting about 2 or 3 quarts of perlite that I've thoroughly rinsed to get rid of the dust. I have tried vermiculite as an egg medium in the past, but I'm now convinced that the perlite does a better job of keeping the eggs from coming into direct contact with moisture. Again, see Garrett Hartle's videos for a detailed explanation. These 5 little brown eggs are from one of my eastern box turtles. The turtles laid them in the soil in their cage, and then I dug them up and moved them here. I haven't incubated turtle eggs before, but last year I put 5 clutches of leopard gecko eggs and 2 clutches of ball python eggs into the incubator, and every single egg hatched, so I'm crossing my fingers. Here I'm testing to see if I can get 8 egg boxes to fit, and I found that with 8 boxes the lid doesn't completely close. But given how well the cooler retains heat and water, I don't think it would be a problem to run it with 8 boxes. In my other incubator, I actually put in 2 aquarium heaters. I plugged the first one in and got it set to the right temperature, and then I unplugged it and plugged in the second heater. I adjusted the second one until it was reading exactly 2 degrees higher than the first heater. Then I plugged the first one in again. The idea is that the one that runs hotter will keep the incubator at the higher temperature. But if it fails, the second one will kick in and keep the incubator just a couple of degrees lower. To put the incubator in action, pour just enough water in so that the water reaches the main shelf of egg crate. Then plug in the heater and the circulation pump. I used the temperature sensor that came with the heater to check the temperature inside of one of the egg boxes, and every few hours I've adjusted the dial on the aquarium heater until the temperature stabilizes at exactly the temperature I want. Be aware that it took a couple of days of adjustments and waiting to get the temperature exactly where I wanted it. The second temperature sensor that you see in the video was one that I used to see if the new one was calibrated correctly. When I got the bag of perlite, I poured the whole bag into this plastic container and then rinsed it over and over again with water to remove all of the dust. The resulting perlite is damp, but it does not clump when you squeeze it. I used a hot soldering iron to poke a hole on each end and in each side of the box. Then I practiced turning the box in my hand while pointing to each hole as I turned. I got pretty good at this. After making the holes, I filled each box about half full with the perlite. The idea here is to create an environment that is extremely high in humidity, but with almost no moisture coming in contact with the eggs. The perlite acts to support the eggs above any water that may form in the box, without the perlite itself becoming damp. In my experience, perlite does this better than vermiculite. Last year when I used this incubator, I had no problems with mold. The eggs dimpled up during the last 2 weeks of incubation just like they're supposed to. And it seems that the moisture content of each eggshell was just right because I didn't have any animals getting stuck in dry eggs. I know I don't have a lot of data to go on, but so far I'm very satisfied. Once again, many thanks to Garrett Hartle of Reach Out Reptiles for putting together his videos on reptile egg incubation. I strongly suggest that you watch them for more information on why this method works so well, and give it a try yourself. I've put links to his videos in the description.